Well, a federal court has finally ruled that fluoride poses an unreasonable risk to our health. So then why the hell is it still in our drinking water? Will the incoming Trump administration finally put an end to all of that? We sure hope so. Partner at Siri and Glimstead, the lead attorney for the plaintiffs in the Food and Water Watch versus the EPA, lead attorney on that was Michael Connett. He's the one responsible. Folks, if you're watching this, if you want to know who the man is that really drove this into the ground and stopped the EPA from doing this, trying to lead this crusade about getting the fluoride out of our water, that's this man. Michael Connett now joins us for a deeper dive discussion on fluoride and the uphill battle with the government. Nice to see you, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for having me on.
Well, we've been following this story for a couple of years here on the show, and as this court case unfolded, and of course now we have the resolution. We have the federal court ruling that fluoride does pose an unreasonable risk to our health. First of all, just your reaction to that. Were you shocked that they agreed with you?
By the time the ruling came out, I wasn't shocked because we had two trials in this case. And the way the evidence came in, the nature of the expert testimony, and the kinds of questions that the judge was asking throughout the trial, I did think we were going to win the case. Now, if you asked me 7.5 years ago when we first filed the case, whether I thought we were going to win, to be honest, I would have said no. I would have thought it was going to be too much of an uphill battle. But by the end, and just the nature of the testimony, I did feel pretty confident that we were going to prevail.
You talk about the nature of the testimony. What were some of the most compelling arguments against fluoride in our drinking water that you heard, from the witnesses that were brought to the stand?
Right. And to be clear, this case focused on one adverse outcome of fluoride exposure, and that's effects on the brain, particularly the developing brain. And so the testimony at trial was really focused on that. But I think the most compelling testimony focused on the vulnerability of the brain during the prenatal period, during early infancy, the fact that there is no effective blood-brain barrier to keep chemicals out, the fact that fluoride gets through the placenta, and we know there's going to be access to the brain in utero. And you couple that with these birth cohort studies that have been funded by the National Institutes of Health here in North America that have now consistently found that fluoride exposure during pregnancy is significantly associated with reduced IQ in children. And at trial in this case, we had the good fortune of being able to call as experts the scientists who are publishing those NIH-funded birth cohort studies. I think their testimony was given a lot of weight by the court.
So the NRC found that lipids and phospholipids and protein content have been shown to be reduced in the brains of laboratory animals subsequent to fluoride exposure, correct?
That's what they're saying here, yes.
And the CDC agrees with that finding.
Yes, as a summary of the hazard.
And that was really the headline, wasn't it, Michael? Which fluoride linked to lower IQ in children. I mean, that hit hard. And that hit probably parents hardest when thinking about growing up. I would go to elementary school in Pennsylvania and get those little pink pills in the back of the room. They would give us in a little cup. And every morning we had to take these fluoride pills before school started. In kindergarten and first grade and so forth, you had to take your fluoride pills. And to think that it was lowering my IQ or thinking that's lowering the IQ of these children is just devastating.
Yeah, and one of the things we did get on the record in this case is I had the opportunity to depose the Centers for Disease Control through what's called a 30B6 deposition, where the CDC had to put forward a representative who would defend CDC's position on fluoridation. And it was a lengthy deposition. And one of the things I asked the CDC about was, how does fluoride actually work to help teeth? Okay. Because when we started this program, and the reason you were taking those pills, Clayton, is because the public health community back when we started this program believed that you needed to swallow fluoride. You needed to ingest it. And the earlier in life you ingest it, the better. That was the premise of adding fluoride to pills and adding fluoride to drinking water. Well, when I deposed a CDC official, he admitted under oath that the predominant benefit of fluoride to teeth, whatever that benefit is, comes from topical contact with the outside of the tooth when the fluoride's in the mouth, not when you ingest it.
So CDC recognizes and accepts that fluoride's predominant mechanism for preventing tooth decay comes from fluoride's topical contact with the outside of the enamel, correct?
Predominantly, that's where the benefits are, yes.
Okay.
And he also admitted, based on that, that there's no benefit at all, from a child receiving fluoride in the womb or a child receiving fluoride in infancy, the first 6 months of life, because there's no teeth, there's nothing to apply topically, right? And so that admission I thought was significant because at the same time, the evidence is showing that that's the period of greatest risk to the brain. If you're being exposed in utero, if you're being exposed through infant formula in your first few months of life, that's when the brain's most vulnerable to fluoride's adverse effects. And yet the CDC was admitting in this case under oath that there's absolutely no benefit during that period of life. So from a risk benefit standpoint, there's literally no benefit to offset the risk to the brain.
Did they know this? Were they hiding it? Were they fully aware of this? And you knew that they were hiding this? Or was this sort of like a revelation from the CDC? Wow, we didn't realize this was so damaging and it actually doesn't do anything.
Well, fluoridation really should have ended by the 1990s at the latest. And that's because in the 1990s, the CDC first admitted, finally, that you don't need, that the predominant benefit is topical. It's not systemic, which is what they had believed for decades. So once we knew you don't need to swallow this stuff for the only benefit it provides, namely prevention of cavities, once we knew that, I think the US really should have moved away from water fluoridation at that point in time, because when you add fluoride to water, you are going to swallow it, period. That's what you do with water. You swallow it, right? And right. So we really should have moved away from fluoridation at that time. Now, the case for moving away from fluoridation today is much more compelling when you start seeing these studies finding real and serious risks, including to the brain, including to the bones and whatnot. So once you have a risk now from swallowing this, why are we still adding it to the water of over 200 million people here in the US?
It's a great question. You've spoken about the suppression of the scientific research around fluoride's health effects. Why do you think this suppression occurs? Number one, why are they trying to hide this? And how can it be prevented?
Well, that is something that I have spent a lot of time researching in national archives and in various, for quite a while, looking at a longstanding pattern of data suppression, both from industry as well as the government. The question as to why is a more difficult question, but certainly I think federal health officials, since the beginning of this program water fluoridation, and this started in the 1940s, federal health officials have ultimately seen their role as promoting fluoridation, not as sort of being the sort of independent umpire to assess the risks and the benefits. So the government has really been in a promotional posture as opposed to a more independent one. And I think that's been a disservice to the public, except the public looks to the government to say, just tell us like it is. Like, give us the good, give us the bad, so that we can make an informed decision as to how we want to use fluoride. And instead, what we've seen time and time again is the government curates the information and only gives us the stuff that makes fluoride look good all the time without the risks. So I do think we've had the federal health authorities have done a real disservice to us, the public, in how they've communicated on this issue.
Talk about transparency. What can the public do, public-private, do to push for greater transparency in the scientific research related to public health? Like, what are your hopes and dreams for the incoming Trump administration under the auspices of RFK Jr. and others, and some of these other attorneys who we're now seeing that are going to be part of the administration as well?
Well, I think the first thing, and I think, Robert F. Kennedy has talked about this, and I certainly hope that the new administration will follow through, and that is, RFK talked about wanting to inform the public and provide information to the public about the current state of knowledge on water fluoridation. And I think that would be an important first step. I think it would be very appropriate for the Department of Health and Human Services to communicate to municipalities and to the public that, hey, we thought you needed to swallow this stuff. Now we know you don't. Most countries in the Western world don't fluoridate their water, and their cavity rates have gone down just as much as here in the United States. And there's peer-reviewed scientific research linking fluoride to increased bone fractures, to arthritis, to neurodevelopmental disorders. It's time for us to move away from systemic fluoride use. I think if the new administration simply conveyed that information to the public, that would be a really important first step towards transparency, and with transparency, better decision-making at the state and local level.
Is it safe to call fluoride a toxin?
Oh, absolutely, unquestionably.
Neurotoxin, bone degeneration, arthritis, I would imagine, probably osteoporosis if it's bone degeneration as well. It's hard for me to wrap my head around it in the United States. We've been doing a lot of segments lately about how the government is just tied so deeply into these companies that make a lot of money off of keeping us sick, keeping us hurting us, and it's really, really disturbing. Whether it's in the processed food industry or otherwise. Why do we have fluoridation in our water? Can maybe you educate our audience as to why in the 1940s we even started this, and how was it pushed to the American people at that time?
I sometimes describe the early politics of fluoridation as a perfect storm of special interests. There was several at issue. First, you have the sugar industry that was heavily promoting and funding research into fluoride because from the sugar industry standpoint, they wanted to see a way of tackling tooth decay, which was a real problem in the US at that time. They wanted to find a way to tackle tooth decay without limiting sugar intake, right? So they had a vested interest there, and they acted on it. And there's a lot of historical documents to show that. So you have the sugar industry. Second, you have the American Dental Association. And why would the American Dental Association, this trade organization of dentists, why would they be promoting fluoridation? Well, certainly dentists who unquestionably thought it would be a good thing. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that the good intentions are there. But there was an institutional interest with the ADA, and that is, at that time in the 1940s, there was a movement to socialize medicine, to socialize dentistry, or to at least bring about more universal healthcare, universal dental care. And as you may know, the American Medical Association strongly opposed efforts to socialize medicine, right? Well, the American Dental Association did the same thing. They did not want to see the government getting involved with the provision of dental care, right? It would cut into their monopoly, and fluoridation was an attractive policy for them because it was a way of appearing to do something about tooth decay that didn't challenge this privatized dental care system that was leaving millions of people without any care. So you have the private dental interests that had a stake in this. And then you have, back then, a very significant factor is big industries like the aluminum industry, chemical industry, steel industry, fertilizer industry, which were being besieged by lawsuits on fluoride pollution, communities that were being poisoned from air pollution and water pollution with fluoride. And these industries were very involved in funding research on fluoride, research that, painted a very rosy picture of fluoride being safe at low levels, because these industries had a real interest in demonstrating, like, don't be scared of the fluoride pollution. It's actually good for you, right? So you had a corruption of the science from industry. And I think industry, like the aluminum industry particularly, was promoting the idea of fluoride actually could be good for you at low doses. So I think you have those three main institutional interests at stake in the early days of fluoridation.
Now, how is this fluoride still in our water today? I mean, is it at the municipal water level that there's giant jugs of fluoride that just get every day dumped into the water supply?
Yeah, it's a local or state decision. Some states mandate fluoridation in every community, but most states, it's a local decision. The fluoridation chemicals themselves are shipped. The source of these chemicals is primarily the phosphate fertilizer industry, which is mostly located in Florida. And fluoridation chemicals are basically liquefied air pollution. You have an industry, the phosphate industry, which has had a long-standing problem with fluoride pollution, because when they make the when they process the phosphate ore, it generates a bunch of fluoride gases, which they have to trap in air pollution control equipment called wet scrubbers. And that basically adds a water to these gases, which creates a compound called hydrofluorosilicic acid. Okay, if you dump hydrofluorosilicic acid on cement, it's going to burn a hole right through the cement. It's a very corrosive, toxic waste product of the phosphate industry. What they do is they barrel it up and ship it around the country for water fluoridation. But
and then we drink it. And then we drink it. Oh my God! So yeah, this is how they're able to get away with their pollution, essentially, or the offshoot of their processing. It's like we don't know what to do with this extra stuff. Let's just dump it in the drinking water and have Americans drink it. It's a brilliant strategy.
Yeah, the solution to pollution is dilution, because if they took hydrofluorosilicic acid and they dumped it in a river, that would be unlawful. If you dump it in the ocean, that would be unlawful. There's specific regulations that prohibit the disposal of hydrofluorosilicic acid and fluoride chemicals into the environment. But if you meter it into your water supply at this so-called optimal concentration, then it's a product, it's not a waste, and we pay for it. We actually pay to add this chemical to our water supply, right? I should mention, Clayton, that over the past 15 years or so, we've seen a real uptick in the amount of fluoride chemicals that are coming from China, as opposed to our own phosphate industry here in the US. And there is a lack of transparency and clarity as to what industries are generating those fluoride chemicals, and what, if any, quality control there is on those chemicals. But a lot of communities now are getting their fluoridation chemicals from China.
Oh, amazing. And so again, this water now, so it's in our drinking water. We're cooking with it. We're making pasta with it. We're filling up our kids' water bottles. They're going to school. And at the end of the day, there's no topical benefit because you're not using it on a toothbrush. You're just ingesting it and swallowing it. So we're essentially helping this phosphate industry to dispose of their pollution by giving it to our children in the drinking water.
That's right. I mean, the CDC takes the position that even at the low levels of fluoride that you get in your mouth from drinking fluoridated water, that has a topical benefit. That's the CDC's position. You're swishing your teeth all day long in a low level of fluoride, and that has a topical effect. Okay. But you got to ask yourself, does it make sense, first of all, to add a chemical to the drinking water that doesn't treat the water? Because to be clear, fluoride does not treat the water. Like chlorine treats the water, it kills the bugs. You can drink from your tap and not get sick, right? That's a good thing, okay? With fluoride, you're not treating your water, you're treating the person drinking the water to prevent cavities, okay? So first off, does that make sense? Do we want to do that still? Use the water supply as a vehicle for delivering a medicine or a drug. And then second, does it make sense to add a drug to the water supply that you don't need to swallow? That's topical only, especially when the risks come from swallowing it. So it is I think it's the writing is on the wall. It's pretty clear that this is a backwards policy. It's a relic of kind of Cold War medicine. And most of Europe has already recognized that. Most of Europe has already rejected fluoridation. 98% of Europe does not add fluoride to its water. The US is an outlier there. And that's one of the things that, kind of amuses me and frustrates me with a lot of the media discourse that we see right now after RFK announced his intention to advise against fluoridation is the media acts like that's this crazy idea, whereas most of the Western world has already done it. Like most of Europe has already ended fluoridation, right? But we treat the idea here in the US as if it's a fringe idea, if it's crazy, and I think that is a disservice to the public.
Well, and of course, the criticism of him on that multiple issues, food poisoning, most of Europe, you're not allowed to have red dye. Compare a Heinz ketchup bottle in Europe to a Heinz ketchup bottle in the United States, and you'll see all sorts of different ingredients in the United States version, high fructose corn syrup, things that are outlawed in Europe. But he's somehow a conspiracy nut for wanting us to not have all of these chemicals that have been outlawed in most of the Western world. It's really, really shocking, and it's unbelievable to watch the Mockingbird media push this. What's your sense of how long it'll take to get this out of our drinking water? I mean, we now know the results. We know the risks associated with this. Very minimal benefits, if any, to our teeth, and all seems to me the risks, the pain associated with arthritis and neurotoxin links to brain development, and all of these things far outweighs any kind of benefit to our teeth. How long do you think it'll take for them to remove it nationwide?
Well, the court issued its order on September 24th, ruling that fluoridation presents an unreasonable risk of IQ loss. And since that court's order, we have seen dozens of communities already either end fluoridation or begin the discussion to end fluoridation. So local communities have been taking action. And when RFK came out with his statement in early November, that led to, even more communities taking action. Naples, Florida, which serves 300,000 people, just voted last week to end its fluoridation program. The Florida Surgeon General, Dr. Joe Ladapo, has just advised all Florida communities to end this practice. He's called it a public health. He called it public health mispractice. Public health malpractice to continue fluoridation. So we are seeing action at the local level, but we also the court ordered. And this is an important point. The court ordered the EPA to take action to address the risk. Okay, and so the EPA is now under a court order to begin a rulemaking proceeding. And in this rulemaking proceeding, the EPA has an obligation to do something that will eliminate the risk. So how do you eliminate the risk posed by adding fluoridation chemicals to drinking water, I think the most direct and obvious and only effective way to do that is to ban fluoridation. And the EPA has the authority to do that. The EPA has the authority under the Toxic Substances Control Act to issue a nationwide ban on fluoridation. And that would be if the new administration wants to take real action to protect the public from fluoride, from excess fluoride exposure. The clearest, simplest, most bulletproof way of doing that is have the EPA, under this court order, issue a nationwide ban. And that's what I'm certainly looking for the new administration to do. It has the authority. It's right there. There's no question about it. EPA can ban this practice. And if it does so, the U.S. will follow the path of the vast majority of Europe, which has already done it.
Have you gotten a lot of blowback from the phosphate fertilizer industry? Because what are they going to do? What are they going to do with all this extra fluoride that they've been dumping in our drinking water once this stuff gets banned?
Well, the phosphate fertilizer industry, if it's been involved in anything in the past few months, has hit its tracks pretty well. There's not a sort of public footprint, if you will. But the phosphate fertilizer industry is a notoriously dirty industry, as anyone in Central Florida will know. And what they currently do with their excess waste is just dump it into these, they call them these gypsum stacks, these massive mounds of waste slurry. And the top of these mounds, they have these acidic ponds laden with uranium, radium, arsenic, and a whole range of toxic compounds, including fluoride. So if they can't sell their fluoridation chemicals to water municipalities, the first line of action they will take is just dump more of that fluoridation chemical into their acidic waste water ponds that sit on top of the gypsum stacks.
Oh, God. Well, I was just about to buy a timeshare condo next to a gypsum pond. I'll make sure that I don't do that in the future. Michael, I'll get you out of here on this, which is lawsuits. Now that we know, and there's this connection, and is the government shielded from a massive amount of maybe class action lawsuits or individual lawsuits against whether it's the EPA or CDC or even local municipalities? Like, they've known about this. They've been aware about this, the lowering of IQ in children, arthritis, osteoporosis, all sorts of health problems. Do you anticipate any massive amounts of lawsuits here?
Well, it's always difficult to sue federal officials, okay, in any kind of personal capacity or even institutional capacity for a policy. So I don't see lawsuits against the EPA or CDC for them doing something, to address past wrongs. Okay. But I do think there is a potential for lawsuits against local water municipalities for putting people at risk with this program. So I have not yet I haven't begun any such lawsuits. There's certainly been a lot of inquiries about those kinds of cases. And so I think that that's something you may see in the years ahead, and not only against, the water authority for adding the chemical to water, but also the companies that are selling the chemicals that are being dumped in the water. I think you might see some cases against those companies. Now, there is also a potential for lawsuits against companies that target young kids with fluoride products. And by young kids, I'm talking preschoolers and toddlers. And there is a number of companies that have grossly irresponsible marketing practices where they are presenting like fluoride, adult strength fluoride toothpaste and mouthwash as candy. So like parents are buying bubblegum flavored, watermelon flavored, candy flavored fluoride toothpaste and mouthwash, which can be very serious for a child to swallow and cause problems, and they're packaging like it's candy. And I think that there is a real potential there for lawsuits against those companies for exposing people to children to significant risks.
Finally, what can people do? I mean, I've stopped using. We don't use any fluoride toothpaste in our family. We use fluoride-free toothpaste and have for a number of years. And back when we lived in New Jersey, we had like a reverse osmosis system installed in the house because of really terrible water. New Jersey has some of the worst water, I think, in the country. So you had lead, you had, high chlorine issues, fluoride, all of that stuff. So just to have drinking water in the house, we had a reverse osmosis system, but I think it was like $2,000 or something. So it's not cheap, and Americans are hurting right now. Can't afford installing $2,000 reverse osmosis systems in everyone's houses around the country. So what can people do to try to avoid this stuff?
Well, first, on the Brita filters and the pure filters and refrigerator filters will not remove the fluoride. So that's the first thing people should know, because those filters use an activated carbon technology, which does not remove fluoride. To remove fluoride, you need to use a more robust filter like a reverse osmosis, right? You can get whole house filters that use a deionization technology, which can be effective. But as you know, these filters are expensive. They're not, like a Brita, they're more expensive. And that's one of the problems with fluoridation is they target low-income communities under the premise that, they need dental care, and the premise that adding a cheap industrial chemical to the water constitutes dental care, which I think is rather insulting. But when you target low-income communities with fluoridation, you really deprive them of a choice, because many families will not be able to afford a filter that can remove fluoride. But I would also add, Clayton, for those who do want to reduce their exposure, another option is to purchase spring water, which you can get delivered to your house in like 5-gallon jugs. That has the benefit. You don't have to worry about the particular filter technology or replacing the cartridges, which I personally like. I don't want to have to think about, have I replaced my cartridge every, like the last 6 months and stuff like that. So that's something that you can look at as well. And you can always call the company before you begin ordering, the water and find out what the fluoride level is. You want your fluoride level below 0.1 parts per million or 0.1 milligrams per liter. And I definitely want it below 0.2. So I'd use that. I'd use that as a rule of thumb. And that's your by removing fluoride from your daily main source of water. That's the most important way of reducing your exposure. But as you alluded to earlier, when you are adding fluoridation chemicals to over 200 million people's water, you are contaminating a whole bunch of processed foods and beverages that are made with that water, like Coca-Cola, sodas, juices, beers. So just because you're removing the fluoride from your own water, you're still going to be exposed to fluoridated water when you drink that Coke or you drink the beer, because so many of these bottling plants are based in urban fluoridated areas, right? So that's a problem that is really hard to avoid because these products aren't labeled. So you can't go to the store and say, does this drink, is it made with fluoridated water? It's not going to tell you that. And that's one of the reasons that we can't just rely on individual action, like, buying yourself a filter or spring water. We need some form of policy action here, because if we don't have the policy action, you're going to be exposed to fluoridated water virtually every day through your processed foods and beverages.
So I guess the message this holiday season is don't drink water, just drink tequila. That's the only way to be able to protect yourself anymore. Oh, yeah, that's why we need federal action here. Absolutely at the top. People can go and get these Primo water 5-gallon jugs, which, we have in our house too. You can go to Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's. They sell them right in the front there. You can get the big jugs, put them on a thing, or you can have them delivered to your house. I guess it just comes down to economics. If it makes sense for you and your family, how much the price of those is compared to how much you're spending on your home drinking water. So yeah, it's a tough situation, but thank you for your incredible bravery and fight on this. I mean, we wouldn't be here without what you've been able to do, and you and your team. So thank you for this. Thank you for the fight, and thank you for educating all of us about this. We really appreciate it, Michael.
Well, thank you, Clayton. I appreciate the opportunity to come on here.